My name is Liam Mahoney, and it is 4/11, Tuesday, May 9th, 2023. And for my compilation of the SCP files, I'm going to start with on the SCP Foundation Secure Contain Protect website, scp-wiki.wiki.com, I am going to read Dear College Odyssey. The buck stops here. 3 Portlands, Friday, November 16th, 1990. $2, £4, 1 hour, GEPS. Finding Avalon, Rediscovering My History by Andrew Braydack. At this point in the year, every student at Deer College will have at least a passing idea of how deeply entrenched Fae culture is to 3 Portlands. The Avalon Fae built up this city. They worked their asses off. They studied, followed their dreams, fell in love, had children, and eventually they died here. We see it in the city text on our road signs and the sweet smell of freshly baked sweet rolls from the Avalonic bakeries on our street corners, and the brightly colored parade floats that travel through Prometheus Plaza in every year's summer festival. And yet, in the conversations I've had on campus about this history, not nearly enough people seem to know much about it. Some here even mistakenly believe that it was the third great diaspora that brought us here, which we read and mentioned at a different time, with the name Avalon meaning nothing to them, excluding the most ignorant cases. To many residents of 3 Portlands, only known that name as a footnote in our city's history, as an aside in a history textbook. I guess that's just how it tends to be. People forget, and generations forget far faster. I think it goes without saying to state that it's been hard to be Fae these past few years. We've seen the wanton destruction of Estenburg and High Brazil, the 2 places that we found shelter and safety in, catalyzed by the normalcy organizations that always seem to be behind such things. I'm going to place this. At this rate this is going, it feels as if 3 Portlands could quickly become one of the last major enclaves of Fae culture, and judging by how few Portlanders outside our community actually seem to care about it, that's saying something. These last 2 years have been utterly demoralizing for me, and I've begun thinking not just of what we've lost recently, but what we've lost generations ago, what I'd never get to experience. And then my friend Elaine came to me with a proposal. She believed that she had figured out a way to bring Avalon back, if only temporarily. She doesn't know much about the Fae. Her research comes from concerns about the stability of 3 portlands and the creation of a safeguard should something happen to it. Avalon would be a test case for this theory, and should this work, she wanted me to be the first to see its glory in almost 90 years. I could finally return to the home I've never known. A dimension's demise. For my entire life, I've been led to believe that Avalon's death was not quite the same as the death of its sister nation, Brazil, which you have doubtlessly read about at this point. In the coming years, there will come a day when the fog surrounding Brazil lowers and the island resurfaces as the nuclear wasteland the GOC left it as. One would hope against hope that despite the devastation, there would be something left, the remnants of buildings, of a home that one could look upon and get some form of closure to the situation. Some have even put forward proposals to resettle the island, although I doubt that anything will come of them. Avalon, whether it is a blessing or a curse, did not have such a fate. Elaine called what happens there complete mythical deconceptualization. Complete mythical deconceptualization. My family and community do not have that name for it, but they know just as much about how it happened. Towards the end of the Fae Empire, nomenclative magic was developed, treating the spoken and written word as a physical pillar of the world, and using someone's name to exchange them, to exert power over them. It was created by a tyrant to destroy her enemies and exert greater control over her people. But with her defeat, it was adopted for more constructive purposes. As the dust settled and the remaining Fae had to find hidden ways to live, the founders of Avalon asked a new question. What if nomenclative magic didn't have to end with names? Nomenclative means nomenclative definition. Nomenclative. Of or relating to name or the act of naming. They discovered that the power of the word could be extended to storytelling and myth-making, and through these stories they built the physical foundation of their dimension. Avalonic story weavers would go out and seek to create legends about themselves, meddling in mortal affairs as a way of empowering their homeland, which is what I'm doing. Even when a curtain of normalcy had existed in the past, the church often being the driving force behind it, cracks could form in such a narrative, which these story weavers would exploit, building their houses on the metaphysical backs of the whispers of the humans who lived just outside the ways to their city. ways is capitalized. The Sixth Occult War changed that. The world was permanently changed by said events, with the belief that maintained normalcy among the general population would no longer prove sufficient, and so-called anomalous activity was projected to increase at a staggering rate. A new organization was formed, one with an ironclad grip on normalcy and thus on the world as a whole. The damage to Avalon was apparent from 1884 onward, but its pace quickly hastened with the invention of anesthetics, and even more new technologies to keep the anomalous world subjugated from the rest of the world. Adding to this, the thaumaturgical backlash. So let's say that. The performance of miracles. Pronunciation. Thaumaturgical. Adding to this, the thaumaturgical backlash from the war necessitated more story weavers to work more often to keep the dimension from collapsing. The demand was higher than ever, even if the supply was at its lowest. Pleas were made to the British Occult Service to provide amnesty for story weavers. They refused to let that happen, but instead evacuated the population to 3 Portlands. And on July 11th, 905, the dimension known as Avalon simply ceased to exist. The same would happen to 4 other smaller Fae enclaves, the fates of their people varying wildly between them. This was not an intentional event like the Third Great Diaspora. No one wanted Avalon to die. That said, the people in charge didn't necessarily seem to care enough to let it live either. 3 Portlands, too, is a dimension built in much the same way. Unlike Avalon, it was an unintentional creation. The 3 cities, known as Portland, had enough nomenclative and narrative ties that said dimension simply sprang up overnight one day. As such, it has the same vulnerabilities. If something happened to any of its component cities, I and my friends who are much smarter than me would wager that much the same thing would happen to it. Many of you might be new to the city, but I grew up here. among the shadows of buildings and on streets full of magic and chaos. If 3 Portlands went the same way as Avalon, I would remember this place dearly, and it kept in my heart. But my children would never know of it, never truly know. And so, for me, realizing that this had already happened to me without realizing it, it was crushing. My only reference for Avalon was a single photograph, a sepia-tone picture of my great-grandparents next to their old cabin. My grandfather, Patriarch, gave it to me the day after we received the news about Hybrazil. I'll stop saying it that way. He wanted something of Avalon's memory to remain. They are standing, their arms around each other, underneath a giant tree, light shining through the leaves in a way that one can't quite place from the picture alone. According to my grandparents, the leaves of the trees were crystal, and the light refracted into brilliant rainbow colors across every surface. Sounds like the tree of knowledge. Next to them, that wasn't in the book, I just said that. Next to them was a river, which my grandfather would say tasted like honey when drank from. And then there was their cabin, a small, simple wooden shack, even for how small it was, though. Every plank was carved ornately. Every surface had been turned into a scene from one of the great stories that made up Avalon. In the cabin walls, even in the grainy photograph, I could see images of tricksters running away from villages, of story weavers handling fresh fruit to the mortals who could not handle its taste, of short love affairs between human and fae. In this one wall, it felt as if I could see all of Avalon. God, it's so long. Over the last few years, I've been learning the names of as many figures on that wall as I could, and lamenting the loss of those names I could not. I would hear stories from my grandparents about growing up in Avalon, but they never captivated me, for one reason or another. I guess it's the difference in context. Before, being Fae was simply a fact of my existence, but now I have to think about it in a much deeper way. What happens to Avalon, to Hybrazil, to the people massacred in Estenberg's living district, to the victims of the Third Great Diaspora? They all came from the same root cause. To me, the opportunity to rediscover Avalon meant that all of this could be reversed, and that one day we could see a world no longer defined by normalcy and all of its destruction. Perhaps that's optimistic. I sure as hell didn't feel optimistic. Elaine's proposal was simple. Ideas could be taken away from the world, but as long as there were those who remembered them, they could return. She ran the numbers, and she realized that Avalon's resuscitation would only take a small auditorium full of people, at least for proof of concept. It wouldn't survive long, and I would need to be out of the dimension in less than 2 hours before it collapsed, and I would cease to exist with it. The risk was complete, if something was wrong, there was nothing I wouldn't lose. That was fine with me. Everyone has something for which that's an acceptable risk. Everyone has something for which that's an acceptable risk. I'll take a break for now and post this separately. But I will also add to the end of this, because it was mentioned earlier, SCP, wait no, not SCP, something else. It was mentioned by order of Overseer Directive Alpha/1911. This is Ralston's proposal. Was mentioned, I think, at the top. Let's see. There was a link in the text near the top of the page. It explains the term something. Report was. You'll see is since they called This text includes SCP-5373, but I'll include that in a separate video so it's more organized. So I have not finished yet. I'll just quickly say my thoughts about this is that this is the concept I've learned from reading this. If you want to read the next parts, then you can just skip this to the next parts, which I'll read later. I just need a break. Is the idea of a dimension collapsing that, with my research, I've been calling the massive dream realm as the dream world, but I'm starting to think maybe it isn't the dream world itself. It just happens to be the place that people go to in their dreams, but it's not actually a world, and it's not intended to be a dream world. And what it is sort of like everything falling to the ground. So if you imagine like thought bubbles of ideas and dreams, and if they all just popped and collapsed on each other, and that would be what we call now the dream world, but it's really just, it falls down what I would imagine into hell. So what we call hell is really the dream world, but it's so big because every idea that people have doesn't go up into the divine realms that may or may not currently exist, but it just falls down into a confined space, which would be the core of the Earth, which is burning hot and full of the ghosts of all of these planet eaters and diseases and dinosaurs and everything that's dead, which their spirits can be inhabited by darkness, even if they themselves aren't the same entities. So I'm hoping that reading the SCP Foundation will help me to identify more specifically about the diversity of creatures and entities that exist in our world that aren't being mentioned or talked about, but just happen to be collected by these people who create this fiction, and it can be applied to real science to actually treat this as a real problem. But because it's an interpretation of ideas, it could mean that some aspects might be completely true, and some might not be, and it might be a metaphor for something else, and it could just be a pathway, such as all of the story being a path to a certain object or entity or being or place. And at that point, you'll have the knowledge or the items or companion, whatever you need to go to the next place, to the next waypoint. But you won't know that ahead of time. This isn't an omniscient place. It's the dream realm isn't there is no omniscience in it. It's the lack of omniscience which defines its existence. So you can't imagine everything going on there because it's the destruction of omniscience, which is hell. Which means there are things and people that are just lost and forgotten there and never found again because no one can access them. And that's what hell is. And I thought about writing a book later about hell. I could just label it as fiction and it be like one of these SCP Foundation stories that everyone acknowledges as fiction, but maybe someone who is aware enough could use that for some form of real science or magic, or both with metaphysics. But I think I'll end the video here, and I'll take a break and post the next parts of this video. So, bye.